Welcome to Season 2 of New York, Quebec, and the water route to the center of the world. This is a special bonus episode, Two Lights for Paul Revere, to mark the 250th anniversary of his historic ride and the start of the American Revolution. Make sure to place two lights in your window tomorrow night and darken the room, joining millions of other Americans participating in the Two Lights for Tomorrow initiative. New England Puritans were so radical that they looked down upon even the local Huguenot celebration of Christmas Day with a feast. Despite this, 88% of all French marriages in Boston before 1750 were to New England partners. Paul Revere was produced via just such a union. His father was a religious refugee who was born in southwest France and fled to Boston from the island of Guernsey. The elder Revere was apprenticed to a metalsmith, a trade he would pass down to his more famous son. We forget this Protestant Francophone stream when thinking about the development of the United States. It's fascinating to hear that Paul Revere's name actually sounded like something closer to revoir. Now, how does Paul Revere make it into our podcast on New York and Quebec? Well, he just happened to have passed through the Bronx 4 times. Here is the news he delivered to New York concerning the Boston Tea Party back in 1774. Boston, January 3rd, 1774. The express that went from hence the Friday. Afternoon after the destruction of the tea, arrived at New York the Tuesday evening following, and returned back last Monday, performing his journey in a shorter time than could be expected at this season of the year. We learn that when the inhabitants of that city received the intelligence, they were in high spirits, and vast numbers of people collected, one and all declaring that the ship with the tea on board designed for that port should, on her arrival, be sent back, or the tea destroyed, that they highly extolled the Bostonians for what the Indians had done here, and immediately forwarded the account to Philadelphia. Our informant left the city after the papers were printed, which contained the foregoing articles under the New York head, and adds further that the tea ship was not then arrived. That Captain Ayscough went to the coffee house that day, and said he had dined with the governor, and declared before a great number of merchants that as soon as the tea ship arrived at the Hook, he should go down and supply her with what necessaries she might be in want of for her passage back, and inform the captain of the resolutions of the people. On Tuesday morning early, the bells in this town were set to ringing on receiving the above intelligence. It is said the behavior of Governor Tryon at New York with regard to the tea will redound much to his honor, whilst the conduct of a Hutchinson will be execrated to the latest period of time. Spy. Add clarifying information about spy. Whereas it was reported that one Withington, of Dorchester, had taken up and partly disposed of a chest of the East India Company's tea, a number of the captured Narragansett Indians went to the houses of Captains Ebenezer Withington and his brother Philip Withington, both living upon the lower road from Boston to Milton, last Friday evening, and with their consent thoroughly searched their houses without offering the least offense to anyone. But finding no tea, they proceeded to the house of old Ebenezer Withington at a place called Sodom, below Dorchester Meeting House, where they found part of a half chest which had floated and was cast up on Dorchester Point. This they seized and brought to Boston Common, where they committed it to the flames. The conduct of Messrs. Paxton and Hallowell is really diverting. On every stir of the people to take their general sense respecting the invasion of their charter rights. Away go my lords to an armed ship or the castle, now wretchedly perverted from the place of our defense, to an asylum for our worst enemies. And after they have forwarded their packets to the British ministry, declarative of the tremendous danger their important personages are in, we see them, strutting about in the same insolence of office they used to appear. It is said their sublime highnesses, the tea consignees, have a strong yearning to imitate their example. But beware of mistakes, gentlemen. Remember you are voted public enemies by more than 30,000 of your fellow countrymen. Revere had long been known as a writer for the Committees of Correspondence, an intracolonial network of several thousand, whose job it was to facilitate the spread of patriot news garnered through spy organizations like the Sons of Liberty. He would ride between Boston and Philadelphia several times during the period of 1774 to 1775, delivering news on British Crown policy and imperial troop movements. He would be known to British authorities in Boston, who specially monitored his goings to gauge levels of patriot activities. In May of 1774, he would have ridden south on the old Boston Post Road that follows the overall route of the modern Interstate 95 near New York, but then cut southwest across modern-day Westchester County, through what would have been Pelham and Phillips Manor, then onto the Kingsbridge and south to Manhattan. It's still possible to trace Revere's original steps along a section of modern roadway called Colonial Avenue, which straddles Pelham and New Rochelle today. Revere would have known my own hometown of Eastchester very well. Eastchester, New York was built upon land granted from Puritan sympathizer Thomas Pell. The land granted was centered around the old Hutchison family homestead. Anne and her family had been killed in Dutch colonial conflicts 30 years earlier. One of the oldest founding documents of English New York is the 1665 Eastchester Covenant, signed by the 26 male heads of household who migrated to the area a year prior from Connecticut. Its contents cover the division of land, ministry support, building codes, childhood education, husbandry, and communal killing of rattlesnakes. Most importantly, though, it contained a provision brought over from New England, the town meeting concept. The men of Eastchester would jealously guard their right to a town meeting and the ability to send representatives to a New York assembly. Leisler's rebellion more than 20 years later would include 70 men from the Eastchester area, as a fair election to the assembly was one of the main grievances of the movement. The area was anchored by the Anglican Church St. Paul's, a building Revere would have used as a landmark and is a National Historic Site preserved today. He corresponded with Isaac Sears while in New York. Sears was a radical patriot and heavily involved in the underground acts of revolutionary civil disobedience and military preparations. He sought to silence the loyalist press in New York that continued to pump out the arguments of Reverend Samuel Seabury, the rector of St. Paul Church in Eastchester. The Reverend had been producing some compelling literature arguing against the violent revolutionary acts under the nom de plume Westchester Farmer. A young Alexander Hamilton attempted to counter the loyalist pamphlets with some of his own, but the Reverend had powerful friends. Local notables Judge Fowler and landowner-owner Edmund Ward also helped support efforts to resist the sending delegates to Second Continental Congress. Sears took matters into his own hands and kidnapped the Reverend and Judge Fowler, parading them around New Haven. This drastic and illegal action received rebuke from both Hamilton and George Washington. New York has our own female Paul Revere. Her name was Sybil Ludington. This teenage revolutionary heroine was a mere 16 years old on the night of April 26, 1777, when word of a British raid on Danbury, Connecticut, reached her family's homestead in Putnam County, New York. Her father, Henry Ludington, was a colonel in the local militia and had 400 men at his command, but these forces were spread over miles of Hudson Valley farmsteads. Sybil volunteered to raise the alarm and galloped over 40 miles in the driving rain. Though the British were successful in their raid on Danbury, Sybil's heroic actions rallied Patriot forces. Under the command of General Benedict Arnold, the New York militia helped drive the British back to the Long Island Sound at the Battle of Ridgefield. You can view her statue today in Carmel, New York. So let's end our special bonus episode with a reading of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's famous poem, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, 'If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light. One if by land, and two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm, through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm.' Then he said, 'Good night,' and with muffled oar silently rowed to the Charlestown shore, just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide at her moorings lay the Somerset, British man of war, a phantom ship, with each mast and spar across the moon, like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile his friend, through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears, till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. Then he climbed to the tower of the church, up the wooden stairs with stealthy tread, to the belfry chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the sombre rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade. By the trembling ladder, steep and tall, to the highest window in the wall, where he paused to listen and look down, a moment on the roofs of the town, and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath, in the churchyard, lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like a sentinel's tread the watchful night wind as it went creeping along from tent to tent and seeming to whisper, 'All is well.' A moment only he feels the spell, of the place and the hour, and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed on the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth, and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and sombre and still. And lo, as he looks, on the belfry's height, a glimmer, and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes, till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing, a spark. Struck out by a steed that flies fearless and fleet. That was all. And yet through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night. And the spark struck out by that steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep, is the mystic meeting the ocean tides. And under the alders that skirt its edge, now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the cock and the barking of the farmer's dog, and felt the damp of the river fog that rises when the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when he galloped into Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting-house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest. In the books you have read, how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball, from behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For borne on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. Thanks for listening to New York, Quebec, and the water route to the center of the world. And don't forget to put out your 2 lights.